Hi. I've done a previous video Bible study to this one, which was an introduction to the book of Revelations. And if you haven't had a chance to see that, you might want to look at it. But at any rate, I'd like to now discuss the 7 letters to the 7 churches in Revelation chapters 2 and 3. And by way of background, the author of this book, John, had been sent to the island of Patmos, which is just a small, tiny island. I don't think it's more than 6 miles long, and it's in the Aegean Sea, just off the coast of Turkey. And he was sent there by the Roman officials because of his faith, and especially the things he was teaching and preaching, and they didn't like that at all. So he was exiled to that island. And while he was there one morning, the Bible says he was in the Spirit. I believe he was praying and meditating and worshiping God and communing with God. He heard something, a voice behind him. It sounded like a trumpet. I don't know if that meant it was loud or blasted, but at any rate, it turned out that this was Jesus, and John described him here, and the way he described him was very awesome and even somewhat intimidating. And we read in these 3 verses, I turned around to see who was talking to me, and I saw 7 gold lampstands. And among them there was what looked like a human being wearing a robe that reached to his feet and a gold band around his chest. And his hair was as white as wool or as snow, and his eyes blazed like fire. And his feet shone like brass that had been refined and polished, and his voice sounded like a roaring waterfall. Now, I've been to Niagara Falls before, and I was impressed with the roar of the falls as they fell over down into the river below. And John did what I think I would have done, and maybe you too. He fell flat on his face, prostrate before the Lord there, and he sort of, as if he were dead. He kind of played possum. But then Jesus did what he had done many times before in the Gospels during his 33 years on earth. He said, "Don't be afraid." And he next then did something I thought was rather unique. The Bible says he took his right hand and he touched John. He placed his hand on John. Now, I have a little dog named Tilly. She's a dachshund. She's not a full-sized dachshund, but she's not a mini either. She's in between, what they call a tweenie. Whenever I take Tilly out for a walk, and if there's kids around, they always say, "Oh, Mom, look, a wiener dog." And she is very cute. And when we got her, she was about 9 months old. She had no social skills at all. She still doesn't. So we took her to a class at the Humane Society called a manners class. And the whole purpose of this was to socialize Tilly, get her used to other people, other dogs, and crowds and so forth. And she went through the whole class. It was, I believe it was 7 days long, 7 different days we went. And she didn't pass with flying colors, but she did pass. But she still has no social skills today. And Tilly is afraid of everybody. She's afraid of anything that's out of ordinary or out of its place. And she manifests this fear by barking. At night when we're watching TV, we have a window that she can look out of in the living room. It's real low, and she can see. And if there's a car that parks in front of our house, she starts barking. Or if anybody happens to walk by, she really barks then. And my first reaction is to, "Tilly, hush! I can't hear the TV." And every time she does that, you know how many times that works. You may even hear her barking in the background now. That never works, 0 times. But what will work, and every time this works, is if I get up out of my chair, go over to her, crouch down, and I touch her. And I speak calmly, but I touch her, stroke her a little bit. And that apparently is a very good method because it works. And that's just what Jesus did here with John. He said, "Don't be afraid, John," and he touched him. Then we read in the last 2 verses of Revelation chapter 1, "Write the things which you have seen, and the things which are, and the things which shall be after this." That's 3-point outline of the book, by the way. The things which you have seen, that's this chapter 1. The things which are, that's the 7 churches and what they're like in chapters 2 and 3. And the things which shall be, that's the rest of the book of Revelation. And there's not much disagreement. Or it goes on to say, "The mystery of the 7 stars which you saw in my right hand, and the 7 golden lampstands." The 7 stars are the angels of the 7 churches. And the 7 lampstands which you saw are the 7 churches. So we have 7 churches, and we have 7 angels, which that's what these stars represent. They're the angels. And many Bible scholars, well, there's no disagreement at all about the lampstands and what they're a symbol of. They are the churches. But there's been a struggle over the years about the meaning of the angels in this verse. And it's been pointed out that this word angels can be translated as messenger. Not necessarily an angel heavenly being, but just a messenger. And because of this, some say and feel strongly that these angels are the leaders of each church, the pastor of each church. However, a book I've been reading lately called God's Final Word, written by Ray Stedman. He's dead now. He's gone home to be with the Lord. But he felt and suggested that if you study the New Testament teachings in the epistles of Peter and Timothy and so forth regarding leadership in the early church, you'll always find that whenever there's leadership, it was plurality of leaders, always more than one. It always says there were pastors or elders, so it's a plurality of leadership. And so he says that this can't mean the local church leader, because that would be in the plural. And he even points out that he read a book, and this is a novel, but it just shows that people do believe this. There's a novel written by Frank Peretti. You may have read it. It's called This Present Darkness. And in that book, he talks about this local church that has unseen by human eyes. Nobody can see this, but the church has angels. They're winged creatures with long robes and swords at their side, and they guard the church. And so he feels that, Frank Peretti does, and that they're literal angels that guard churches. There's another book I read that suggested that the angels refers to messengers from each of the 7 churches, not the pastor, not heavenly beings, but just a messenger or a representative from that church. And he goes on to suggest that he feels that perhaps each church sent a messenger to the island of Patmos to visit John, and while they were there, then John gave them a copy of this book and sent it back to each of the churches respectively. And he bases this on Revelation 1:11, which says, saying, I am the Alpha and Omega, the first and the last. Also what you see, write in a book and send it to the 7 churches which are in Asia, to Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamos, Thyatira, Sardis, and Philadelphia, and Laodicea, the 7 different churches. So the key operative word here is send. And I'm not so sure, after thinking about this, even to this day, I still don't know. I lean one way one time and one way another of what these angels, who these angels were, whether they were literal angels from heaven that each church had, whether it was the pastor or the leader of that church, or perhaps maybe even just a representative or an envoy from that church that visited John on the Isle of Patmos, took the book, a copy of the book, back to their church. Actually, I don't think it matters. It's not germane to the understanding and teaching of this particular passage, and it's one of those things in the Bible where if you can't prove it conclusively, who can say which is which? Anyway, what about these churches? Why only 7 churches when we know there were obviously many more churches than that in Asia in those days? Well, the number 7 kind of gives us our hint here. 7 always in the Bible means completion or fulfillment. In other words, completely whole, perfection. So this would be the 7 churches, I think, and many people also think this, that these churches were a representative of the different types of churches in those days. And you could carry that on to today. It would represent 7 different types of churches. And because verse 1 of this Revelation 1 says that this was also written not only to John, but it's for his servants. That includes me and you as Christians. We are servants of God. And so these 7 churches and the 7 letters to them could represent 7 different types of believers individually today. And that makes these letters extremely important for the church today and for you and I today. In Revelation chapter 2 and 3, we have these stack of 7 letters, and many times I'm afraid when the book of Revelation is talked about or opened up to study or to preach from, everybody wants to skip chapters 1, 2, and 3 and get into all the exciting prophetic things that are going to happen and the different plagues and the different things that are going to happen on the earth and the white horse and the pale horse and death and so forth. But I think that's a bad mistake. We need to, as Christians today, as churches today, to study the first 3 chapters of Revelation, especially chapters 2 and 3, about the 7 letters, because I think many of your problems and many of my problems and many of the problems that we see in the church today have answers in these 7 letters. And so in the days ahead, that's what I plan to do, is to study each of these 7 letters in detail and find out what application we can find for our lives personally and for the churches that we attend these days. Thank you.